Okay, so in Sydney, at the Bradley Heads fortification near Mossman, there's a number of 68-pounder guns that are mounted on traversing platforms that overlook Sydney Harbour. It was a small defensive battery that used to form part of the original defence system of Sydney Harbour. The site has now become a heritage-listed war memorial / recreational area. This fortification, it also consists of barracks and underground tunnels for ammo storage, shelter and medical supply rooms. The original structure has been there since the mid-1800s, with upgrades occurring regularly until its decommission in 1934. During my Cub Scout days, our group would often go on field trips to places with historical significance, such as this one. It was a stormy, miserable day when we set off for Mossman. Our troop leader was pretty strict and harsh, a man that never let anything like weather get in the way of an outing. I didn't particularly mind though. I enjoy the rain, and I find that it adds a special element to old, somber sites like abandoned war batteries. Being a New Zealander, it only made it easier again. I couldn't help but laugh at the Aussies in my troop that were shivering under large coats while I took a thin hooded jacket that I kept in my pack. Our bus pulled onto the side of the road at the bottom of the hill near the site, and we began to file off one by one. I trudged out last. Being quite new and not having many friends, I tended to hang back and just keep my head down. My troop leader barked at me to put a jacket on, but I just shook my head and said I was fine. He mumbled under his breath before walking off to begin the climb up the hill to the fortification. It was a good thing that he didn't force me, as I would need the jacket dry later on. We set off after him, single file, with me bringing up the rear. The lightning and thunder were making everyone in the line jump in fright. It was amusing to watch them all twitch in unison. The rain began to get heavier and heavier as we walked. The colour of the surrounding environment washed out to a dull grey as a result. My ears began to be filled with a dull, low hum, only occasionally broken by a loud thunderclap or overheard complaint made by one of the other troop members. They had all noticed it too. Many of them had begun to slap their ears in a vain attempt to get them to unblock. It didn't take long to reach the fort, and we all split up into groups to go and have a look around. I was put into a group with two other boys that I got along fairly well with, John and Michael. We didn't know each other all that well yet, but we got along fine. The other groups made their way straight for the guns and began to climb on top of them, yelling and making a racket that distracted the troop leader. I wasn't interested in trying to look at weaponry while people were climbing around on it, as I enjoy inspecting things up close, seeing how they were put together and how they worked. I made my feelings clear to the other two boys, and they agreed with me. Instead, I turned my attention to the stairs leading down to the now flooded barracks area. It didn't look at all inviting, but that just made me want to investigate even more. I began to make my way toward the stairs with the two boys in my group following reluctantly behind. I could hear one of them muttering, "No way, I'm not going in there. Are you? No way, man." The other replied, "Looks haunted or something, hey?" I chuckled. Although I was feeling a little nervous myself. The hum was getting worse the closer we got to the entrance of the tunnel. I shook my head vigorously to relieve the pressure on my ears, and it seemed to help a little. I looked back behind to see the other two digging into their ears with their fingers. Strange. I couldn't imagine why this was happening. We were practically at sea level, after all. I stopped at the entrance of the tunnel, and I peered inside. Something definitely felt off here. I could feel a pressure radiating out of the tunnel, as though the air pressure was triple that of what was outside it. But it wasn't like a breeze or a wind. It's difficult to put into words. Whatever it was, it made John and Michael stay a few steps behind me. We were all silent. An eerie sound echoed its way through the mouth of the tunnel, its origin seemingly coming from somewhere inside. I took my flashlight out of my bag strap loop and turned it on, and it flickered to life briefly before making a terrible high-pitched buzzing noise and beginning to vibrate slightly. The bulb began to glow intensely before going out with a loud pop. I gasped and dropped it. It was brand new with new batteries and the same make as the other issued flashlights that we had all received when we joined Cub Scouts. The flashlight fell into a 5-inch deep puddle that extended out of the clearly flooded barracks entrance. It rolled around lazily side to side under the water as I watched it, astonished at what had happened. "Don't go in there, man," John said finally. "Yeah," Michael agreed, while nodding his head. "This place doesn't feel right." I turned to them and I tried to keep a straight face. "It's fine. I don't think I can get far anyway," I said. I pointed at the puddle that my flashlight was in. "It slopes downhill, so it's only going to get deeper as I go in." Michael then turned on his own flashlight and shone it past me, into the darkened entranceway. I bent down and picked up my own flashlight. It felt warm in my hand. I shook my head and slipped it back into the easy access loop of my bag strap. "Useless junk," I muttered to myself, before looking up to see what Michael's flashlight had illuminated. As I'd suspected, the floor of the barracks resembled a paddling pool filled with rust-colored water. I called out, "Hello?" and it echoed for ages. I looked back to see Michael looking very uncomfortable. John laughed and picked up a nearby rock before hurling it through the entranceway. The rock splashed and we all laughed. Michael looked as though he had started to relax. They both began to pick up rocks and throw them now. I stepped back so I wouldn't get hit, and I searched around for my own rock to throw. I then remembered that I'd found a few rocks that I keep in my pack, as my mum was a geologist, and she liked bringing them home from bushwalks. These were ones that Mum had deemed unusable or already had, so I simply hadn't taken them out yet. I swung my pack around to my front and opened the front pocket, diving my hand in, and grabbing the first thing that I found and flinging my arm back up and hurling it as hard as I could into the tunnel. Oh no, I thought, fear coming on rapidly, as I realized that I had in fact thrown my set of house keys instead of a rock. I heard an audible thud of the keys hitting a wall before a couple of loud splashes straight afterward. The keyring was a large gemstone that my mother had given me. and it only had 2 small keys on it that were dwarfed by the stone. Ironically, this large stone was given to me in an attempt to make me stop losing my keys. This was the 3rd set that had been cut for me since we moved to Australia, and I was told that it would be my last or I would be grounded. I couldn't leave them in there. "Michael!" I yelled over the now howling wind. He and John stopped throwing rocks to look at me. I could hear the troop leader yelling to round us up as the weather was only getting worse. The thunder and lightning becoming more frequent with every passing minute. "Give me your light," I yelled, stepping toward him with my arm outstretched. He handed it to me, and I turned around to walk back towards the entrance. "What are you doing?" they both asked at the same time. I didn't turn around, but I just yelled back, "I threw my damn keys in there." I didn't hesitate long before stepping inside. The water instantly soaked my shoes and socks. The noise from the storm and wind died down to about 10% of its original volume. I shivered and peered around with the beam of flashlight, looking for a glint of the gemstone or the keys. I shuffled further inside, not wanting to take steps as splashing would drench the rest of my clothes more. The noise from outside was almost non-existent now, with the dull hum and pressure now returning worse than ever. I cussed loudly and bent down to run my hands through the water as I stepped further and further inside. The flashlight began to blink and dim momentarily, every few moments, before coming back to life. I began to become frantic, wanting to just get my keys and get out as soon as I could. I'd walked in quite deeply at this point, now having to round a corner before the flashlight suddenly turned off. My eyes had been adjusted to the dark with the aid of the dim flashlight beam, but now it was pitch black. I cussed again, louder this time, and turned the flashlight off and on. Nothing. The pressure in my ears increased again, and I doubled over in pain, holding my ears with both of my hands and wincing in pain. I could hear my pulse thumping in my ear canal, getting louder and louder, faster and faster, until it all of a sudden stopped. I let my hands off my ears and let out a few trembling breaths before I heard it. Right in my ear. "Hello." A whisper, loud enough to be easily discernible. And then my foot was grabbed harshly. It felt like being in a vice. It felt like it had claws. Its power and force was so frightening. I couldn't move at all, and a coldness began to creep up my now captive leg. Before I could even yell out, I fell, and my ankle twisted. The water, it was so cold, unnaturally cold, as if it should have been frozen. I'll never forget that feeling. I remembered the stories of the night the Titanic sank, the way Second Officer Charles Lightoller had described it as 1,000 knives being driven into one's body, and in that moment, I understood that. I had been walking through it before, and it had not been this cold. I was half submerged, and I came up gasping. As I raised my head, I heard that same voice from before, echoing softly now.
"Hello."
The grip on my foot finally relaxed, and I struggled up to my feet, gripping my arms with my hands and shivering loudly, half from fear and the other half from the freezing cold. I turned around and I made my way around the corner to the entrance of the tunnel as fast as I could with my now sprained ankle. I could have sworn that I felt a slight push on my back as I hastily exited. I turned back around to look, and I gasped when I saw my house keys right there in the spot where I'd dropped my flashlight earlier. I had seen them sail out of my hand, and I had heard them hit a wall inside the barracks. How could they have possibly ended up back here? This was still, stagnant water that, if anything, was flowing back down deeper into the barracks. I looked up one more time into the dark void of that tunnel entrance, and I bent down to scoop my keys from the water. John and Michael hurried over to ask what had happened, putting their arms around me and helping me back to the rest of the troop. "Just don't go in there," I replied shakily. "We told you not to," John replied, his voice sympathetic. Michael stayed silent but helped me down the hill to the bus, where the remainder of our troop was congregated. The troop leader asked us where we had been and why I was limping. I just shook my head and told him that I was fine again. He ushered us onto the bus and we left the area bound for home. I was still shivering. I felt numb emotionally though, completely unable to process what had just happened. Luckily, I had a dry jacket in my pack. As I took it off, I noticed that my flashlight looked as though it had been burned in a couple of spots. After retrieving my jacket and putting it on, I took the flashlight out to examine it more closely. I turned it over in my hand slowly, holding my breath in terror at what I was observing. The flashlight had a handprint, complete with fingers too, seemingly burned into the plastic handle. I showed it to John, who was sitting next to me, and he encouraged me to throw it away as it was broken in 2 pieces from the fall in the tunnel. I asked him if he could see the handprint, but he refused to look. I decided to keep the rest of the experience to myself after that. Until now. This all just makes no sense to me. This fort was never in conflict. No one died there. It wasn't even in use during the last World War. What the hell did I encounter down there?